And I'm personally very happy to be able to be part of this and to welcome whoever is joining us. My name is Wilhelm Verwoerd, and I'm working with Prof. Pumla Madikizela at the Studies for Historical Trauma and Transformation unit at Stellenbosch University. So it's great to be in this group and also to talk about this theme which has become so challenging, not just globally, but also on our continent and in South Africa, especially during the pandemic. So thank you, Dr. Mshai Wangola, for joining us from Nairobi. It's lovely to meet you, and I look forward to your input from that part of the continent. And then, as I said, my colleague, Prof. Pumla Madikizela, it's lovely to welcome you also to this session, Pumla. And then Richard Mbaso from Mpumalanga also joining us. So thank you very much. And then I see Erin, and I don't know who else is joining us. So I think we want to jump in by giving as much time as possible to our resource person and our respondent. And Richard has kindly offered to also support us in capturing the key points. So Dr. Mshai Wangola is from Angola from Kenya, and is a performance scholar who uses culture also to do her work as an academic, as an artist, as an activist. And she's also very involved in civic education in Kenya. So it's lovely to hear somebody who is actively also involved, using her academic training to grapple with these big questions of social justice. And so I look forward to hearing your input. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much to the chair. And I just want to say what an absolute pleasure for me it is, and a privilege to be able to join this conversation. I had, first of all, the absolute privilege of meeting some of you last time I was in South Africa for the first summit, and learned so much. And then we did have representative from the chair and I think one other person at a conference in Nairobi, in Naivasha actually, just before the pandemic hit. And so it's wonderful to be able to just keep on having these conversations, and a pleasure to meet everybody else. I'm just going to jump straight into it and try to keep, my goal is to keep to the 10 minutes, so I'm setting my timer. And I'll be, what I'm going to do is more just indicate where there are, where you can come back and ask questions, but I'll just try to go through to set the ground for a quick discussion. I really appreciate that said that I was a performance scholar, and just very briefly, I know this question of where's your evidence, where are you drawing these thoughts from, comes up. I did send a discussion prompt, but I'm not sure everybody's had a chance to look at it. But if you, and I'm sure, I'm happy to make that available, and you will find that I've put in links of just to indicate some of the sources that I'm drawing from. Very much, I am drawing from conversations. As I'm a performance scholar, I'm very interested in how people make meaning of the world. And the emphasis here is on how people make meaning, and not just the academy or sites of people who are recognized as doing intellectual work. With the belief that everybody is always doing intellectual work, but we don't often see and we don't often use the evidence that people use in the ways that they do. So very just quickly, a series of civil society conversations. I chair a trust. We are the biggest facilitator, non-state facilitator of civic education in Kenya. And we do a lot of facilitating other people. So just listening to what comes through from our partners. I also am a founder member of an information platform we call The Elephant. That's www.theelephant.info. And what we do is encourage, again, people to think in different ways. And as part of that, I have been hosting a series of conversations. And I just want to say I'm drawing a lot from those conversations, particularly one that was on social inequality. And we call the conversations the Corona Cafes. And what we did with the Corona Cafes was not so much to talk about the pandemic, but to ask how we use this moment of the pandemic to help us think about our society, think about the questions of, and in that particular cafe, and it's one of the links I've given, of social justice. And then also I am drawing from a scenario project that I've been working on, where we're looking at making Nairobi a just city and some of the conversations. So I'm happy to go back to any of those, but that's just to give you a sense of the evidence that I'm using for what I'm speaking to. I'll draw your attention to the concept note. And one of the things that it said was that a collateral value of COVID-19, and here I'm citing directly, is that it has given us a new lens in which to see the injustice and threat to peace and sustainability encapsulated in systemic poverty and inequality, mostly along the contours of historical injustice. And for me, this is what has set the keynote for what I want us to think about. I also wanted to use a quote from one of my favorite writers. I love putting intellectuals working in different spheres in conversation with each other. This is Aikwe Ama in his book, Kempt in the House of Life, which is really about doing intellectual work. And I want to read this quote in its entirety. I will not read any other quote, but I thought this one was useful for setting the tone. Let us work to turn the forgotten paths into the remembered way. Let us mix the long memories of a people once forgotten into new narratives of our own making as we move into space of our own choosing, as we dream in images drawn from our people's best desires, as we plan in designs drawn from our own reflection, then make again the universe that might have been but was not, here in this place, now in this time, freed for our new creation. And the premise of everything I'm going to be saying is that while my theme is recovering from the pandemic, a lot of the conversations, particularly from policy spaces, seem to me to be talking about how can we go back to the norm where we've come from. And I want to suggest that the work of recovering from the pandemic should instead be doing what Arundhati Roy challenged us right at the beginning of when the pandemic season started to set in. She said, let's look at the pandemic as a portal through which we move into a new space. Just very quickly, I'm defining the terms. When we talk about social justice lens, for me, social reminds us that this must be people-driven and people-centered. A lot of the conversations around COVID have been virus-driven and virus-centered. And I want to keep going back to that thing that Alma says, a long memory of a people. You're always putting people, putting the basic unit of society at the center. The recovery plan, like the response, like when we talked about mitigation, has to be founded on what is happening at the whole of society. I don't know about South Africa, but in Kenya, what's driving our conversations is what's happening in the economy. 2 days ago, the day before yesterday, our minister in charge of the Treasury Cabinet Secretary said, we know things are bad, but we can't shut down. We can't go back to the measures that we know we need for the health because our economy is suffering. There are big conversations in the realm of politics. We have elections in another couple of years, and the politicians have been holding huge rallies. And these are some of the conversations. They want us to have a referendum, and everybody's saying, people, we can't go into a political season right now. But then, of course, that is lost. The cost, the social cost is lost in the imperative of the economy. So this fundamental tension is what we have to really pay attention to and do something about. When we think of justice, I want us to think in terms of what Johan Galtung talks about, positive peace, but I really, really like the notion of sustainable peace. And if you look at the report of the advisory group of experts for the 2015 review of the United Nations peace-building architecture, it's called the challenge of sustaining peace. And what they emphasize is that you have to get this whole idea of, number one, positive peace. And secondly, the UN has always talked about peace building. And they say you must define peace building not only at saying when a society has gone into violent conflict and you want to prevent that relapse into violent conflict and you want to resolve the issues that send people into conflict. That's one part of peace building. But you must also, just as importantly, prevent the lapse into conflict. And often dealing with this lapse into conflict is dealing with those fundamental issues that are paying attention to issues of historical injustice, paying attention to the inequalities in society, and making sure you invest in redressing those situations. And of course, the SDG goal that for me was, in terms of this, really, really useful to think about was SDG number 16, which links the issues of sustainable development, inclusivity, access to justice, and effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions. So just very quickly, when we think about from mitigation, I did a presentation actually to the social justice chair at one of the conversations we were having. And that time it was around April, May. I was looking at the mitigation measures across Africa. What is it that countries across the board were doing? And I'd be happy to go back to this in question if anybody wants to know. At that time, our biggest concern was we were looking at the mitigation measures and wondering what the cost was in terms of social justice. So for example, if you shut down factories, or you put lockdown measures, or you tell people that they must wear masks, how are diverse communities managing to deal with that? What does the impact on shutting down businesses, especially small businesses, do to people? What does it mean when you say that people can't cross borders, or everybody has to be at home by 7 o'clock? Ironically, now that we're talking about recovery, our worries are the other way around. So for example, in Kenya, 3 weeks ago, we reopened schools. We reopened only exam classes and one class in junior primary. In that time, we've had schools reporting. So certain schools have had to close down because of mass infections. At least one principal has died. A dean of a university has died. And this morning I saw that one school had reported 52 students who have all been infected. Now, the huge issues arising out of that is especially public schools are saying government has not provided them. Some of them have no running water. Government has not provided masks. Government has not provided sanitizer. Government has not built extra classrooms as they did in Rwanda. So you've got children in the same classrooms being told, use the classroom of the classes that are not there, but no additional teachers. So we are looking at a crisis. But the Minister of Education has said, even if we go through a second or third wave and people die, we cannot keep the schools closed because we're losing too much time. So social justice issues in that sense. The centering of state security rather than the security of the people. That's another thing that we need to discuss. Most of our responses, just with mitigation, the same thing with recovery, have been coercive, punitive, and through force rather than through the use of rewards and persuasion. I was talking to people who are working in a hospital, and they've been told to go up to full staff back, even though that sometimes means that, okay, that's my 10 minutes, but that sometimes means that the people who, staff who are vulnerable are having to go back to work. Okay, in just 2 minutes, let me just quickly go through the rest. So I'm talking about a human rights approach, both to as much to mitigation as it is also like the question of that to recovery. And so looking at a response that is people-centered, people-driven, rather than state-centered and state-driven, that focuses internally, not only within the country, but within the communities in terms of what works for them, what they prioritize, where their resources are, and that builds solidarity across and amongst social diversities, taking into account the unique circumstances, social, political, historical, economic, the whole range of it, that affects different countries, different societies, different marginal groups within them. And so I'll just finish by saying, I've got much more to say, but I'll just finish by saying this concept of working together. What does a people-centric Pan-Africanism in the 21st century mean? Not only between countries, but amongst communities. How do we do that and also learn from places like in Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean, countries within Africa, such as Senegal, that have done really, really well, and then right across the world, including in small communities as well as big communities. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you, Mshai. I mean, we covered a lot of ground there, and I'm glad that we have somebody who is very experienced and qualified to respond. Thank you, Prof. Phumla Kubodu-Madizela, from the chair in historical trauma and transformation at Stellenbosch, and with a lot of experience in this field of deep peace and cohesion, not just political superficial, institutional, but also relational cohesion. So I look forward to hear more about what you want to say in response. Thank you. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you so much. I feel like Wilhelm to say, wow, I heard Wilhelm kind of saying that, exclaiming. I was full of exclamation marks myself. And just also the way that you've been engaging with communities back in your own country. I love the idea of Corona cafes. In fact, I made a note, both a mental note and on my pad, to speak to Wilhelm about that and about adopting the theme and perhaps even continuing conversation with you. It's such a wonderful way of capturing what the issues are, Corona Cafe, and not about the virus, but about how do we move forward from here. It's really incredible ideas. Thank you very much for that, Mshai. I cannot help, I couldn't help to think about Resolution 1325 when this topic came up, and I saw that you were on the panel to speak on the panel. I realized that actually it's amazing how much time flies, and the question is, what have we done, since the 20 years since this really extraordinary UN Security Council resolution 1325 on women. It's been 20 years, this resolution on peace and security for women. And recalling also that this happened, this resolution was passed just 5 years after the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, which galvanized women in very powerful way. And in fact, the one before that was in your own country, Mshai. So this has been just a wonderful time for us to be reflective. And the virus has just forced us to sit down and be reflective. I see that you have referenced, and I think it's very important, the Sustainable Development Goal number 16. One that came to mind for me just in the context of 1325 is the one that addresses the challenge of achieving gender equality in the year 2030. I mean, all of these questions, all of these resolutions are relevant. In fact, have never been more relevant than they are now because of the virus. Now, I just want to, you've highlighted for us a very key point, very important point, and I cannot add to this point except to point out how critical they are, how critical these issues that you've raised for us are. I'll start with the question towards the end of your presentation, or the question you pose. What does it mean to build solidarity across, social diversities? And this is so important. What we have witnessed in South Africa, and in fact across the globe, and especially in our continent, we've witnessed just staggering violence against women at this time, and against communities that are marginalized. Violence by people who are supposed to be protecting us, protecting communities. The police, for instance, have shown a lot of violence in their approach of enforcing the laws, enforcing the lockdown. I mean, the language in itself, the language of enforcement of lockdown, and therefore the response to the idea of enforcing is strong arm tactics. And what I would like us to think about, and perhaps even at the level of reflecting on rapporteuring, is how we challenge this approach of the police, this approach that kind of continues as if there was no change, as if there's not been change from the colonial period that saw our communities as communities to be violated, to be treated in this way. You must force the law and order, maintaining law and order, enforcing the laws. And all of this is language that the police that have come after have simply inherited and continued to operate as if they exist in the past, as if communities are enemies. Now, in the past, if you think about apartheid, in the past, communities that are marginalized, communities, people who are Black, people of color, they were considered by the state to be enemies of the state because constantly there were struggles against the regime. And so the language of the police today is language that responds to anything that is done, any campaigning, any organizing within these communities as organizing that is hostile to the state. And even now with the coronavirus, when all of us are suffering the consequences of this pandemic, there is no sense of empathy, no sense of compassion. And so this is why I really like your bringing up this issue of solidarity, the critical importance of solidarity, and the how in answering, at least in attempting to begin to answer your question of how do we do it. One step or one of the steps might be to retrain the police or to train those who are training the police so that they understand that these methods of policing are the methods that have led us to crisis and crisis that are repeating what happened in the past. Marikana in our country, for instance, the killing of so many people who were attacked by the police because they were not observing the lockdown rules. Now, for people who are protecting communities from the spirit of protection and understanding, the important thing is to understand the pain and the suffering that people are going through, and therefore to try to respond not in a manner of enforcing, but rather in a manner of understanding. That requires a lot of training, requires a lot of undoing of those lessons from the past that have simply been inherited from the past. Now, that's at the level of the protectors of communities. At the level of one another, the idea of continuing dialogues, what you are doing, what you've described to us as dialogues that are focusing on what community, starting at the level of communities. You are posing another very important challenge to scholars, academics who are always doing research in these communities, and you are saying to these scholars, do research that is relevant to the communities. Don't do research for the sake of research itself, of academic scholarship, but research that is focused on what the needs of the people are. I have to tell you, Nshai, that within our research unit, this is our approach to research. We are very interested in this process of engaging in dialogue between science and society, which is to say, we are as scholars, we have to engage in research, but our research must constantly be in conversation with what is happening within our societies. So, for instance, all our work in the area of trauma, in the area of healing trauma, in the area of finding ways of repairing the brokenness of the past, in the area of bridging the divide between racial groups and increasing dialogues and work that Wilhelm is leading within our units. All of this work is geared toward both new knowledge, establishing new knowledge, new learnings and insights from this work, but also feeding back to the communities so that our work continues to be relevant. So this is important, particularly if the lens we are using is the lens of sustaining peace. So much of what is going on in our communities, the violence that we have witnessed in our communities, is as a consequence of the language of violence that is happening in general in the society. Now, I think one of the things we've got to be aware of, we've got to be conscious of, is that when we speak about violence, we are not only referring to violence of the physical kind, we're referring to other kinds of violence. For instance, corruption is in every way a violence against a society that is dependent on a state, on government, to take care of these issues of inequality, the problems of inequality in our country, the problems of continuing inequality that you speak about so powerfully, Mshai, in your presentation, are problems that are inherited from the past. But it's not enough for us to simply say this is inherited. These are the repercussions of apartheid. The question is, what are we doing about it? And because the resources lie mostly, I mean, we as a civil society have different kinds of resources, but the state has got material resources in order to help to improve these circumstances. If billions go down the drain through corruption, then there is very clearly consequences that are going to be spilling over into these processes that should be concerned about healing the inequality of the past, about healing, the violence of poverty, in these communities. So all of these, this is a consciousness that we need to bring to the policymakers, that this is violence, and because corruption is has overwhelmed our society, it's an overarching problem in our society. It's cut across all levels of civil society and has spilled over into the way that even just small, municipal structures operate within communities. The corruption has spilled over at this level. Now, it's important for policymakers to recognize that what they do is actually inflicting violence on the fabric of society by way of destroying the morality of our communities and our society of our societies. And that because this is happening right at the top, it is bound to affect the way that people relate, just to understanding what law means, what it means to obey law. So you find that there is no respect for the law in our country. There's an utter disrespect for the law. Why is that happening? There's a range of reasons, but one of the most important one is that right at the top, this violence, these operations of corruption are actually a disrespect for the law of our country. And because it's happening at such a high level, people don't take it seriously. I tell you a story, a very quick story. In the village village town where I come from, Gala, in the Eastern Cape, there is a story that this is a true story. Young men were caught breaking into a home and stealing, videos and computers and television screen, and they were caught in the act. And so the police were called and they were taken. And as they were taken to the police van, they were very angry. They said, if you're going to arrest us and if you want us to serve us, then you must start with Zuma first. And so this is not just a flippant statement. It's actually what people believe, that if law is not operating as it should at the top level, why should we be expected to obey the law at this level? Now, this it's not only at the level of robbery, break-ins, it's at the level of violation. I started violation of women's bodies, and we have witnessed how in our country and in our countries on the continent, how the violence has actually been meted out against women mostly and children. And this is a serious problem, because if we are thinking about peace and security, well, it's not happening in women's homes, because as we all know, most of the violation that happens against women happens as a result of betrayal by the ones that they trust most, the lovers, the partners, the husbands within their homes. And the pandemic has exacerbated that, has kind of, opened that and made that even clearer, that women are not safe in their homes. And so as we shut down and as we lock down, they are locked down in these relationships of violence. And so unless we recognize that the policymakers must start with themselves first, we are headed toward the 16 days of nonviolence against women, this campaign, 16 days of nonviolence against women, which will start in a week's time in South Africa and elsewhere. Now, we're going to see parliamentarians dressed in their regalia, in their parliamentarian and their ANC colors, dressed in their regalia, marching with us, joining us and marching with us. Now, why is it that there is marching when it comes to this violence that is happening out there, but when it comes to the violence that happened at the level of the states, the violence of corruption, they don't march, and yet they've got the power to march. So my wish is that as we conclude this, we are going to challenge these leaders at this highest level, that the language of understanding what is happening at this highest level of power and leadership in our country, the language of describing these actions that are against the law should change. We should call it violence, the violence of corruption. We should call those who are corrupt the perpetrators of the violence of corruption. And I think this gives us language then to organize and mobilize against this in larger numbers, because now this is happening in the courts of law, through the Zondo Commission. But once the language reaches us at the level of civil society, we gain the power and the imagination to act in ways that are much more powerful than we have been doing. But that has also to, in parallel, the parliamentarians themselves, particularly women. Why particularly women? Because this is the era of women. This is the 20th anniversary of 1325. This is the 20th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration. And so all of these, and this is the 5th anniversary of the SDG that really called us into ensuring equality, gender equality by year 2030. So all of these are landmark moments. This is a landmark moment for us. This conversation we are having here is a landmark moment. We ought to take it back to these leaders who are women first. We start with the women first and implore them to act in the interests of the societies that are suffering not just the pandemic of this disease, but the pandemic of the violence of poverty and the violence of marginalization within our society. Thank you.
Thank you, Phumla. Thank you, Prof. Phumla. Sure. Both Mshai and Phumla, you've really helped us to also become aware of how deep the water is that we are swimming in when we address these huge challenges of social cohesion and sustainable peace. Thank you for that. I mean, is there anybody who has listened who might have a question? It looks like, Erin, you have a question.
I'm not sure it's a question. I have some comments. But thank you so much for really, really rich contributions. And I'm sorry, I've got 3 different conferences, all that are extremely important. So I'm trying to stay focused. But I'm not quite sure what our goal is in this session. If it's, I attended the last Social Justice Summit and we created recommendations and all of that. I was part of that process for the peace and security stream of it as well. Which was quite intensive over a couple of weeks. I'm sure some of you were there as well. But Mshai, I really liked that you linked this to the global agendas. I think it's important because I think that COVID-19 is a global challenge, and we have a great opportunity right now because policy at the highest levels, the leaders at the highest levels are opening doors and talking about linking this to inequality, linking this to building back better. Linking this to transformation, and for South Africa, that's beautiful. That's music to the ears of those of us who want to see transformative change, not in South world, everywhere. But so I think that there's real opportunities to connect across borders and to those transformative discourses that are there, and movements. And I think. I'm a peace building scholar. I'm an associate professor at WITS and work on social contracts. And I've done quite a lot of research on this, on COVID and social cohesion and building back better as well. And I think, also we want to be linking, you know, I struggle when we have these parallel sessions because I want to be in all of them. I'm sure we all feel that way. But we need sessions that really do explore the multidimensional risks and the methodologies for how do we tap into the multidimensional risks and apply that multidimensional analyses to responses, right? So that we get at the root causes. And, you know, the sustaining peace vision also really at the heart of it is about creating a national vision, right? Supporting the idea of national vision and dialogue at the heart of peace. So I love Pumla. Well, both of you were talking about dialogue, and I couldn't agree more. And, you know, I really had to struggle to kind of develop some recommendations for this paper I just did on South Africa for my university and around COVID-19. And, you know, I think we need to also really engage the existing structures such as NEDLAC and so forth and talk about why they're not sufficient and how dialogue structures need to be much more bottom up. And, you know, we need to have much more transformative dialogue structures actually to promote the kind of thing that you're all speaking about. And so, you know, I think, yes, I couldn't agree more. The police issue, I mean, I was trying to investigate that as well. And you know, there's a new police act, I don't know, or bill, and I don't know how participatory that has been, how much real consultation that's had to go into it. But, you know, there's some good research as well that really shows that the laws are all in place. It's the practice. And, you know, it's not even necessarily coming from the top, but it's this culture of silence and, condoning what is happening, right? So there needs to be, you know, really this accountability and breaking the culture of silence in the police force so that there is, you know, much more accountability. And I think, you know, I love the idea of the violence of corruption and really shifting the discourse on that as well. I mean, it's absolutely appalling. 2/3 of the contracts of the COVID-19 here, the money that went towards COVID-19, 2/3 of the contracts are being investigated. That is scandalous. It's scandalous, and people should be out in the streets. You know, it's outrageous. So social cohesion, I mean, there's tons of research on this. Social cohesion is connected to inequality and the perception of inequality and unfairness. So it's really key that these things that we find better ways to connect these, you know, both in terms of the analysis and the responses.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Erin. Is there somebody else who, I mean, I'm conscious of time. I know Rapumla has limited time also. But is there somebody who might want to just add your voice? It's good to have as many voices as possible to hear from people perhaps who want to respond or just say something.
I think from me, Prof, can you hear me? Yeah, firstly, I wanted to report that we have a huge thunderstorm in Johannesburg. So I was holding my fingers that we don't get cut off because our internet does have issues when it rains. It just started a short while ago. I think it's just 2 points. And I think Erin mentioned or touched on it, the police force. I just heard on the news this afternoon, 257 police are currently arrested for corruption in South Africa. Yeah, I just heard now in the news on my way back on SAFM. So I think that for me, it's just, you know, it just jumped up because it's something that I had a short while ago. But also in terms of the Mshai, you and I had this conversation last year, and unfortunately COVID happened because I think for me, we were looking at how do we take these conversations down to the grassroots. And that's where the issue of civic education comes in. So obviously, I will not dwell much on that point because I think for me, I even told Prof at some point when we had a brief session afterwards that we would like to get these kind of conversations to go down to the people where the people are. Usis Pumla mentioned the issue of the corruption because it has become a pandemic of its own. But how do people identify and report corruption in rural areas? Because unfortunately, I just came back. I was on my way to catch the conference because I was in Free State. We left yesterday. We're distributing sanitary pads throughout the country. We're going to Limpopo tomorrow. We're going to Mpumalanga on Friday. But the reality is these young people who are up there in the communities, they are starting to see becoming a politician as the career to make it in life, as a career to make your life better. Because the boys and the girls who have never been to school or have just been to primary and they made the loudest noise, they become leaders. So I think it's quite important that we find a way that these conversations, they are disseminated down to the grassroots level. I think those are the few points that I wanted to highlight, which we touched on last year as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. I see the comment from Mandy about the importance of civic education in developing agency. Is there something you want to add to that, Mandy, or are you happy with that as a contribution?
Hi, sorry I joined the conversation rather late, but just caught the tail end of what Mshai had to say earlier, and of course Professor Pumla. And I totally agree with both speakers that we have to go beyond talking. I think Richard also mentioned that go beyond talking shop. I think in some of the earlier presentations, they also spoke about doing research that actually makes a change, makes a difference. I often ask, what will my mother do with this information if you tell her that you're doing research about it, or these are your findings, if it's not going to change her life? And I think we can say that about most rural gogos, you know. What difference is it going to make in their lives? And just on the topic of social cohesion, I mean, and now just a comment that I wanted to make is that I find it rather strange that in South Africa, we've placed social cohesion under the Ministry of Arts and Culture. And it tends to lean towards soccer, sporting events. And then when it's over, it's over. Okay, we either win, we commiserate together, or we celebrate together, and then what? What do we do to sustain it? And I'm going to use a biblical phrase. We talk about a visitation and a habitation. How do we make this a habitation and not just a visitation that happens every couple of years when we have an event? We have a trophy to lift up, you know. How do we take it beyond that? And how do we make it the responsibility of every person in our country? Pastor At spoke about your neighbor earlier on, and that your neighbor doesn't have to look like you. Your neighbor is a person who's got a need, and you have the solution to that need, period. You know, and if we begin to look at the problems we have in South Africa, from that point of view, I have a solution to your problem. You have a solution to my problem. How can we help each other? How can we together change our nation? Because our government's not doing it. They failed us miserably. So how can we now take back our agency? Cancel that social contract because they have repudiated it in every possible way. Okay, how do we take it back? You know, and so those are the conversations I believe need to happen. Also to remove that guilt. We liberated you, therefore you owe us a debt. How do we liberate our people from that guilt? Okay, so that especially our women use their vote. Use your vote. Not withholding it, give it to somebody else. You know, be punitive in your voting if you have to make a point. But it's about agency and believing that you can change the world that you live in. And I think that's where we are stuck, because we're stuck under the social guilt that we were liberated by certain people. And so we owe them a duty of gratitude eternally. As they say, they'll rule until Jesus comes. That we owe them a debt of gratitude until then. We have to take back our power, you know, and believe that we have the power and the ability to change the societies where we live. And so I think somebody mentioned at the level of one another. So start those conversations at home. Then you start the conversations in the family and in the community and so on. But the conversations have to start. Else we're never going to have the social cohesion that we've been dreaming about for 20, 26, 27 years. It's not going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy. Propumla, is there something, I know you have to go soon, but do you want to just say a last word or two?
No, I think I have. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Wonderful meeting you, Mshai. Thank you, everyone. I look forward to the report. Thanks, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you
Bye.
for joining us. Thank you. I don't know, Fundi, you put on your camera. I hope that's a sign that you wanted to join in with your voice, and then we can perhaps get Mshai to respond to what she's heard. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I assume that was a sign. Zoom language.
Oh, yes. Good afternoon. My name is Fundiswa Khaile. I'm a PhD candidate and my research is on social cohesion. I'm looking at trust and sense of belonging. For me, social cohesion is an abstract, and therefore there's certain things that needs to be in place in order for us to, achieve social cohesion, such as trust, sense of belonging, participation, and all these other aspects which are critical, because we cannot. It's not something that we can say this is social cohesion, but when there's trust, when there's when you see that people feel that they belong, and there's that sense of attachment to the place, and I agree with the speakers and also Richard about the issue of civic education. You see, even in the protest, how people destroy properties, because for me, they still think that, they don't belong here. They don't have pride in these, properties, and therefore they can just destroy them. They don't feel that they are attached to the place, and then they have that pride. Really, civic education will play a role. And again, you're looking at the townships, especially in Cape Town, because my research is looking at the city of Cape Town and city of Ekurhuleni. I observe, some commonalities and differences with how people are attached to also the place. The people who are coming from the Eastern Cape, for them, this is just a workplace. They still orientated that, you are here to as to when you provide labor, as to when you are done, you still have a home in the Eastern Cape, and therefore they don't place any attachment to the place. And for us, really, as researchers, we need to understand what are the causes of people behaving in a manner that they do, also in the protest, because we see this level of violence in people demonstrating their dissatisfaction with government. What is it that government needs to do, to ensure that there's trust between, the citizens and also government? Thanks.
Sure. Yes, thank you. I mean, this sense of place, language of belonging, bridging capital across those big divides. Thank you for that. I mean, Mshai, I mean, you come with your East African perspective, but you obviously have traveled in many parts of the continent, but other places too. But is there something from what you heard here, mostly South Africans reflecting on this theme, but that resonates with you, or that you perhaps want to respond to or add to?
No, I just want to say everybody, I think, has it's been so rich in so many ways, just listening to everybody. I'm going to make some really quick comments just in terms of how you're helping me think. If I start with what you just said, Fundi, it's so true. How do we, sometimes the policy documents and, the things that we say and, we research, and sometimes the question is, who's listening? How are they understanding? How are they themselves? Richard has touched on this. What is civic education? How are people making meaning of what they're seeing? And also, how are they speaking back? One of my professors once said something. I'm a theater scholar. That's my root. My art is theater and storytelling. And one of the things that we always talk about is that silence in itself is doing something. By the way, one of my mentors is Trina Lopefa, and she's just been amazing at stretching. When we talk about performance, when are you quiet? When are you just still? And sometimes, as you rightly said, violence is somebody contributing to the dialogue. They're sending you a message, and if they feel they can't speak, they're doing it another way. So rather than just condemn the violence, the first thing you have to do is understand what is being said and why are people using this. I'm not saying violence is always a fantastic thing, but there are times when it's telling us important things that nobody is speaking. Sometimes people's refusal, we've been talking, in fact, this week, the strategic planning process I was with my Trust to Raia, which is about civic education and citizenship. We are addressing the question of apathy. Why is it that some people in the society do not feel that they want to participate in political affairs or in holding government accountable? And what are we learning? By the way, the big new term in terms of politics in Kenya is hustler. And our deputy president says, I am a hustler, and it is time for the hustler nation to take over the country. He's contrasting with the president who's part of the dynasty. So now the whole language in Kenya is about the dynasties versus the hustler. But the hustler is the one who gets by any means. And so we're talking about what that means in terms of when people celebrate and they say, well, yes, he's violent. Yes, he steals. But then how else would he match the money of the dynasties? So that's a very interesting conversation. And we're asking why, and crowds turn out for him. So we are there preaching civic education, values, all those amazing things. They're not listening to us. So it goes back to that question that Richard brought up. What is civic education? That's why I find these forums, like I talked about the Corona Cafes, the new one we started are Pan-African forums, and they're across the whole continent. In fact, yesterday, I had one person, Brian Kegoro, whom some of you might know, Zimbabwean based in South Africa, and Zukiswa Wana, who's South African, although she lives in Cape Town. But we are having conversations across the continent. And for me, one thing that's really interesting, I'm listening to you guys talk about South Africa. It's echoing as if you're talking about Kenya. One of our biggest areas around COVID-19 response and recovery has been police brutality. And I think it's a Singaporean prime minister who said that COVID-19 is going to amplify the state of governance. It's going to amplify the things that we keep hidden or we don't see as well about ourselves. And police brutality has become a big issue because in this time of COVID, it's right there. You cannot ignore it. I think that's why something like NSAS has had such resonance right across the continent. We look at what's happening in Nigeria and we can see it in our own countries. And I think that's another really important place when we talk about security. Why is it that the state is afraid of its own people? One of the things I'm using when we talk to young people, the film Finding Nemo, when you have the sharks and they're repeating this mantra, fish are friends, not food. And I say, this is what we need to tell the police. Citizens are friends, not food, right? Because we always feel like we are against them and we need to build that trust. So thank you very much about that. This question of moral authority that we've talked about, I think is so important. We have just agreed as Uraia Trust that one of our big areas for the next 5 years is to take on the question of values. And rather than focus on civic education in terms of teaching the Constitution, yes, we'll do that. But our goal is to build a national culture, move beyond what does the Constitution say, that's one thing. How it is embedded in our lives and how we live it out is what we want to focus on. If the president is telling us, our president is the big he for she champion, right, in Kenya, but his own cabinet violates the 2/3 gender rule. In fact, the Chief Justice has just issued a statement that has put the country in a constitutional crisis, where he has said the Kenyan parliament is unconstitutional because it does not meet the 2/3 gender rule. Of course, parliament is in arms. They say you cannot send us home. The president is obligated. So we're having, I wish Prof would be interested in hearing this. We're having a big debate on whether shall means may or means must. That's a big discussion in Kenya right now, because if shall means must legally, then our parliament is illegal. right? So those kind of debates, I think, are really, really important. And then finally, I just wanted, you guys have given me so much to think about, but something that somebody said to me in one of the Corona cafes, and he said, our big challenges are three. He said, if we can do these three things, we've solved all our problems in terms of social justice. Number one, deconstruction. We must just stop saying something is bad. We must stop, think, talk about it, and understand. As you said, historical injustice, recognizing it's there, that's not enough. We must ask, okay, if there were historical injustices, what are the legacies today? Who loses if we get rid of that? Because we may say colonialism, we got rid of colonialism 50 years ago, but we haven't changed the system that rewards the privileged, right? Even after 50 years. The second thing we need to do is construct a future that all of us want to go to, all of us want to commit to, including the elite, right? There's a stake for them. If we deconstruct, you're taking away from them. You must construct something where they see themselves as having a place. The hard part is managing the transition between the two, because that part of managing the transition, you must get people with certain privileges to feel that they want to commit and let go of them. You must get people who are not used to even imagining their own humanity, imagining that this could be part of what is their right. And we must get that transactional conversation. So for instance, in Transformative Scenarios Project, which is what I'm working on, it's not just about saying the people who are vulnerable must get. It's about building networks where together we work on a strategy to deliver social justice for everybody. And we all feel that even if I give up some things, I'm going to get. So thank you very much.
Sure. That resonates, given my embodiment as a white South African, where this is one of the big challenges that we're grappling with in South Africa, is how do we get people who are still in this elite position and have still so much power and so much wealth to actually see a different vision where we can be part of a bigger vision of coming at home, but then having to share our privilege, committing to more than just charity. And what has struck me in working also with white South Africans is that people are very good at charity and, like, let's share, and do some upliftment work, but that's very different from social justice. It's from a distance, it's pity, it doesn't involve changing power dynamics, and it doesn't really question your own sense of power and privilege. So I think the theme that I've picked up with a number of the inputs is this challenge to go deeper in terms of our understanding of why we don't have social cohesion and social justice and peace, but also then go deeper in terms of how we can root a kind of a peace and justice in real relationships within and between communities and on our continent and beyond. So unfortunately, our time has caught up with us. I'm glad that we have a recording, hopefully, of our session, and that we can go back to this. And then, Richard, thank you very much for helping us to capture some of the key points, which we can then feed back to the larger group. In terms of Erin's point, what has happened with last year's resolutions and what is the point of this? I think, I hope that this will continue to build the energy through this M-plan and the kind of people we are bringing together, that there's this kind of slow, patient work of continuing to stoke the energy of people to work at this, even though it'll take a long time to change some of these deeply rooted issues. And thank you for also inspiring me again to continue this work of patient social justice work. So thank you.
A resolution is that Richard must take us all climbing, and we say we all made the resolution from the group.
Wow, okay.
Seconded. And yeah, so definitely. Thank you, Mshai, for bringing that again. I'm up for it, and I will put it on the notes. So you see, I've got scribbles of notes. So then I'm adding that last point. But thank you very much. Like Prof said, this was really, really a wonderful opportunity for us to engage and remind ourselves of our roles and responsibilities to society.
Is there somebody else who feel they want to just say something to finish? I don't want to just close anybody's if somebody wants to say something.
Thank you, everybody. Wonderful contributions.
Thank you. Okay, so hopefully we'll meet one day in person, and I really do hope that we can climb some mountains together, also metaphorically. Thank you very much.